an absolutely important role, both as universities in their own narrow role, if I could put it that way, of providing high-level skills to very high-level skills for both the public and private sectors, and on the other hand, of course, research and innovation to contribute to powering up the economies. So in that narrow role, yes, we have to do far better than we are, and I'll come back to that in a moment. There's, of course, the broader role that universities also are expected to play in the innovation space and in the space of achieving social and economic and cultural impact. And that role traverses, I guess, as we know, it traverses the narrow role, but also the grander role of being able to connect stakeholders, key ones in the policy space, in government, in the private sector, connecting them and catalyzing them through their intellectual work, their public scholarship, catalyzing and connecting these important role players and stakeholders to the role that they're expected to play by providing evidence, by providing them with perhaps reflections or reflective pieces, thought pieces, policy advisory roles in respect of these enormous opportunities, and on the other hand, the enormous risks that we currently face and that will accelerate in the period ahead. So turning back to universities now in terms of their traditional role. African universities have had a rather choppy, if you like, trajectory from, let's call it the late 70s into 10 years ago, more or less, where there was this policy advice from, in particular, the World Bank and the IMF, because of the power of their influence, when African nation states and governments were at their weakest, unable to finance public sector services, went cap in hand to World Bank, IMF to bail them out. The World Bank put together structural adjustment programs, the consequence of which was to coerce these governments, East, West, and Southern Africa, with the exception of South Africa, still under apartheid at the time. So enormous coercion placed on those governments to exit investments in university education and to focus their limited public funds on school education. And so technical vocational education, college and university education, disinvestment occurred over almost a 20 to 25-year period. And that had an enormous impact on the infrastructure capacity of our institutions, public institutions in particular, across the continent, particularly East, West, and Southern Africa. And so we've had, and we continue to have, a massive backlog in terms of the ordinary, simple thing of having in good condition student accommodation. It's not in good condition. If we were to use a 5-star rating, I would say across the continent, we're looking at a 2-star rating for our student accommodations. And so there's a lot of work still to do. And bear in mind, these are the leaders of the future that we are putting up in such poor conditions. And then, of course, our labs and our infrastructure so essential for offering modern learning. If I think of online learning, which we all recognize provides an enormous opportunity for African universities to scale up. Consider ASU and its own transition from a traditional university under Michael Crow, evolving into an institution with, 50,000, 60,000 in traditional offerings and 80, 100,000 in online offerings. And so we see that as a great possibility. Yet we still have those backlogs. And in particular, if I think aloud then about the challenge of broadband capability, of fiber, access to fiber, to scale up this possibility of, firstly, to catalyze and scale up this possibility of online learning and teaching. And so, great opportunity, but it does mean that we have to pull ourselves up our bootstraps. And in that context, I think that institutions such as ASU can play an important role of demonstrating what is possible. And so I do think conversations and dialogues with these key public institutions and their leaders and the leadership teams would be critical and important, with the idea of being, actually, some of us have been there, right? We know the journey. We don't know your journey, but we can help you reflect by looking at our journeys. And in this way, we hope to be able to offer you some insight that you might be able to seize upon as you take on this enormous responsibility of scaling up over the next 2 to 3 decades. And scaling up begins by catalyzing the idea, germinating, and then catalyzing the idea of being able to grow in strength, our traditional program offerings, and then beginning to initiate and grow in strength over the next decade, perhaps in 3 horizons of 4 or 5 years each, growing ourselves out of where we find ourselves now and into a new possibility where we are seen as African universities as actually stepping up and stepping into this enormous challenge of providing education for young people.